Hello, everyone. Again, good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Writers Hub here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us back on the show is an author you saw making their official debut in my Authors Roundtable last month. She is back here on the show in her very own episode, and I'm so excited to have her here today. Now, she is a published author, thrilled to share her upcoming YA new adult series, Experiment, which starts with a dystopian thriller, Exposed, set in a governmental facility in the year 2175. Her work promises to take readers on a gripping journey, and she also, like me, has her own YouTube channel where she talks about her works, has her own podcast, and more. And in this episode of the Writers Hub, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about characters and real life inspirations. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, author Olivia Piervincenti. Olivia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, Olivia. Awesome. So excited to have you here back on the show in your very own solo episode.
Yes, I am very happy to be here, and this is such an amazing opportunity. So, yeah.
Nice. Very nice. So, before we dive into our list of questions, Olivia, is there anything more you would like to add about your background as an author, maybe a random fact about you, or any new teasers we can look into for your series?
Sure, absolutely. So as Gabriel mentioned, I am a two-time self-published author of the Experiment series. It is a dystopian psychological thriller series with a little bit of horror sprinkled in there at times. I've been writing the series since I was 14 years old. I am now 18 and a recent high school graduate. And I will be going to college for a double major in creative writing and psychology as a little fun fact. And yeah, cool stuff.
Nice. Very, very nice, Olivia. And also, again, congratulations on your achievement. That is absolutely incredible. I know I said this in the roundtable before, but I will definitely, and I'll probably do it for a special episode for next year, but I'm going to get you, Catherine, and Tatum Carrington, all of whom were probably at the time the youngest authors to appear on the show. So definitely I'm going to try to get all three of you lovely ladies in a call to talk about your guys' experiences.
Sounds great.
Awesome. And speaking of experiences, let's actually dive into the very first question: personal experiences with characters and inspirations. So, Olivia, looking at your series, the Experiment series, how has your own personal life experiences shaped the characters you created? And can you provide a specific example to illustrate this? Maybe a specific character or even side character?
Of course. So there are, honestly, I like to say the Experiment series is honestly, I wouldn't say it's similar to, it's obviously not similar to my life, but I take a lot of aspects from my personal experiences and things that I have personally gone through, or even like for characters use personality traits, and I put them onto the page either to, work through something or just because like, oh, my emotions here are similar to the ones on the page type thing. So a specific example I can definitely think of is of how the Experiment series even started. Just like as a whole, because I used to write like these little short stories of, and I would kind of like self-insert myself as a character, and I would add my friends also as characters within the story. That's kind of how the Experiment series started in a way, with one of those short stories. And I ended up being like, oh, this would be such a cool book. This is such a cool book idea, just to have like this governmental facility and all this stuff. So then I decided, like, you know what? Let's do that. So the first two characters were technically Mabel and Apollo. The first two characters you kind of see in the Experiment series originally started off as self-inserts of myself and someone else, and then they morphed into their own kind of characters. So yeah, that's a coolest example, I guess.
Nice. Very nice. I actually tried to do something very similar back in high school as well, with my first attempt to the writing world. And that was, at the time, the Caldwell Chronicles, which was a pirate story. And all of my friends were each a character in the story. And that was not easy to do initially because I had no idea of how to write the story. I was just being a pantser at the time. But I loved the story so much that I didn't get rid of it fully. And in the foreseeable future, I do plan to go back to that story again and definitely have a better understanding of research, which leads into question number 2. What methods do you use to draw inspiration from real life individuals? And do you conduct possible interviews with probably friends or families, maybe read biographies of individuals you think would be perfect? Or do you observe people in their everyday environments, not only just for specific characters, but maybe for like scenarios or just for like the setting?
Yes, I have definitely been guilty of doing some of these things. For example, especially the observation bit. I love observing people. I love seeing how different people work in different scenarios. So it's just really interesting to me because I'm like, oh, okay, this scenario would be interesting to put my characters in this sort of way. And everybody's going to act a different way. And I just find that really interesting. That's partly why I'm going for a psych major, but that's besides the point. But there's also just with the research bit as well. I have also read biographies when I'm researching something specific. Like, for example, I'm trying to think of like a very specific example of this. I had to research brainwashing for something. I don't remember. I think this was for an early draft of Masquerade, but I had to, I researched brainwashing and also like how to kind of like deprogram from brainwashing a little bit. So I read a couple of, pretty sure they were like interviews conducted or articles from people who were in like cult like scenarios and went through deprogramming therapy, just so I could get an idea of how that sort of worked. So that's also an example that came to mind as I was thinking about this.
All right, I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
Now that you look at character depth, and I think this one is very, very important because it also ties into number 4. What strategies did you use to employ to ensure that the characters in your story that may have been based on real people were multidimensional rather than caricatures? Because that's the big thing when it comes to writing characters that are based somewhat part on real life people. We don't want them to be tropes or physical manifestations of that. We want them to be like real people because it has to make sense for characters to exist in the world they are presented in, no matter if it's thriller, romance, fantasy, or whatever genre.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And one of the things that I do, because I have based characters or used certain traits of people in characters just as a way to kind of help me a little bit. But I think the biggest thing with that is to not make them exactly that person. Because I can see like, okay, like taking a trait, like for example, like, oh, I know someone who's stubborn. Like this character is going to have this person's stubbornness. And this is how this person shows how stubborn they are. But I'm also not going to like make a character like, oh, you have the exact same story, the exact same problems and issues as this other person. So like, for example, I had a character that was based on someone who used to be very close to me. And what I did was I took like personality traits of this person and I like kind of made this character very similar to that person in that way, but their backstory was completely different. I didn't like copy word for word, like, oh, like their home life, or anything like that. Like their whole story was very different. Their interactions in the story were with different people, like they weren't with caricatures as well. So I think the main thing is like pick something specific. If you don't know where to start and you're basing a character off of someone else, the best thing you can do, I think, is to change something about that. And then that can lead them into their own kind of character arc rather than just being another version of this person.
Absolutely, because that leads into, as I said, probably the biggest one, which is question number 4, which is ethical considerations. Because I'm sure viewers and listeners, you have probably read a book that has said like the characters in here are entirely fictional and any names are pure coincidences. So when you were writing the experiment series, Olivia, what ethical guidelines did you adhere to when using real life individuals for inspirations? And how do you approach sensitivity in relations to their stories. Again, you probably use like an aspect of them and didn't want to use too much because, again, there is that fine line between being the basis and the inspiration.
Exactly. I 100% agree with that. And I think the main thing I did as an author to like have those ethics in mind is to not base a full character on a person. Just point blank, don't do that. And there's a couple reasons why I believe this. Like inspiration is one thing. Like taking inspiration from someone and the way that they act in their story is a completely different thing than basing this whole character on a person word for word, fully with no breaks almost. Like it's just how that character is exactly like that person, which I think is just so odd. First of all, why would you do that? I understand like doing it in your private type of life, like writing little short stories, but publishing that I don't do that. Just don't do that. But I think the main thing I did was, first of all, whenever I did use a lot of inspiration from a person, I asked permission. First of all, like, hey, is it all right if I do this? Like, just to get an idea. And of course, it's morphed since then, like with the characters that I'm thinking of and referencing. But I did ask permission. I was like, hey, listen, this is different. Or if I didn't ask permission, I used very little of them just to influence the character. I'm like, okay, no, we're not going to go any farther than that. So that's my like stance on it, I guess is a good way to word that.
Absolutely, very true. And there's even in some instances where fellow authors won't use like people in like their own inner circle, but they'll definitely look at characters from like film or media as inspiration as well. I can say that for one of my characters in my books, Decimus in The Wolf of Rome, he's very much based on the character of Maximus from The Gladiator. He is a father, he is a Roman, he's a very capable general and leader. And he's kind of a mix mash of a lot of other individuals. And I think that's also very, very interesting and kind of complex in of itself. And if you look at another character, while not a book character, still a fictitious character, Benjamin Martin from the Patriot film, he himself was based off of 3 real life individuals. You had Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Nathaniel Green, and I forgot the other individual, but he was a mix mash of, all of these individuals, which is very, very interesting. And that kind of goes into question number 5, which is probably moving beyond, your own inner circle, Olivia.
Yeah.
How did you maintain a balance between factual inspiration and creative fiction? And where do you feel the line should be drawn for other authors who may be basing their characters off of people they know or people they may be reading in history?
So what I think with this, I actually wrote down notes on this question, so I'm looking at my notes. So I think first of all is like creativity is such an important part of the writing process. Creativity is something that we should all be using as writers. Like that's our weapon almost. I guess that's a good way to say that. And I think the thing is, like, especially when you're basing characters off people or even a world off of a certain mechanism, there needs to be a ounce of creativity. There needs to be something other than what you already have. Like nonfiction writers, this is different, obviously. Like you need to stick to the facts. But with creativity, with fiction writers and with people like that, I feel like you can bend it a little bit, especially if you're writing genres like sci-fi or fantasy. You can bend reality a little bit. You can bend kind of like the things the characters can and can't do and things like that. And I think that the line should definitely be drawn in the way where it's like, how did I word this? It's like, oh, snap, everything's fixed. Everybody's fine in the end, even though the story has quite literally shown the opposite. It can't just be like this, like, oh, yay, everything's okay, even though nothing's really happened to show that. Can't be a magical fix for the problems that the characters are going through. And I'm not completely sure if this is what you were asking. I was a little like on the question, but I think just like making sure like it stays grounded in reality, but enough so that creativity can kind of flourish, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, 100%. I think that is a very good approach, especially if you are writing a character which is based on an historical figure or a real life individual, there has to be, a balance between, you have to be respectful to the person you're basing your character on. It's this fine line. Because if it is a real individual, there has to be like a strict fine line. It's like, okay, I can't do anything that this character wouldn't do in real life. Whereas opposed to like characters from like film or media, you do have that creative leeway to give your own spin. So you're absolutely correct. Now let's talk about themes and traits in characters. Now, for your Elemental series, are there any particular themes or traits from real life people that you often revisit in your own writing? And what drives your choice to focus on those?
So I would say the biggest one is mental health. I feel like mental health representation in writing is such an important thing because number one, mental health rates are rising. Fun, great, wonderful, I guess not. And number two, I feel like since more people have that problem, they can more easily see themselves in characters who also deal with similar issues. And I feel like that's very, very important for just overall, because I also want, like in my books, I really want to show, hey, you can have these problems and you can be in these high stress situations and still have like these mental health problems. Like, for example, a lot of my characters deal with PTSD. They deal with some of them bipolar disorder, other things of that nature. And I've done that after extensive research, like making sure, like, okay, I'm portraying this correctly. I'm not making it like, oh, this is fun. No, that's not how I would never portray it like that. But I think that the thing is with that is that number one, I want people to see themselves in my characters, and I want to raise awareness for it. And I also want to show, hey, even though you have these issues, you can still live a fulfilling life and you can still solve problems and you can still be a good person or a bad person, depending on which way. And mental health is also not an excuse. Like that's my main type of thing. And that's, I think, the biggest theme I focus on in the Experiment series in relation to that.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And I even kind of look back at my own stories also as well with a different perspective. And I'll use two examples for this. The first one, of course, is Michael. I actually was part of a collaboration not too long ago for mental health awareness. And we all had to put our stories in our characters and what mental health issues they were suffering in the stories. And when I look back at Michael and really fine-tune, what exactly the character was suffering, I realized I unknowingly wrote a character who was a former angel suffering from depression, grief, and suicidal ideation, which I did not think of at the time. I was just writing the story. But upon looking at that, I was realizing, oh, shoot, I could definitely see, like all the signs sprinkled throughout. And he literally does, this is a little spoiler, ladies and gentlemen, he literally has a battle with his inner thoughts, his depression, the manifestation of every negative thought he has. And Michael literally says, I've let you consume me for far too long. You're the reason I have been stuck in the past. And so in a way, it kind of gave like readers, as one person said to me not too long ago, a chance for people who may be suffering through that to see like you can battle your demons, you can battle that. And then fast forward to Decimus, the Wolf of Rome, it was very interesting, a little bit different, because the main character, he is married or was married. His wife dies. And so you have a single father raising his son. And in the books, I didn't again explicitly state this, but he does, take an herb to help with like his nightmares and stuff. So he takes oysters. That could be interpreted as someone with an addiction problem and him trying to cope with, the loss of his wife, him and his son being moved from their home to somewhere new. And I didn't think of that again at the time, but I remember one of my reviewers said that they gave it to their husband to read. They struggled with that because it was such a the way I wrote it, it was very, very personal and again ingrained to the story that I had written not only an epic, but of a father's journey of trying to not only save his son and save his people, but overcome his grief, overcome his sadness. And that is just, again, very, very fascinating, because you absolutely are right, Olivia, that mental health is on the rise, and we're seeing a lot more of that depicted in stories and as like a central theme or underlying plot. And when used correctly, it's a great power. I don't want to say PowerPoint, but
Theme?
yes, great theme. Thank you. And I think now more than ever, I think writers are definitely showcasing that and having readers really identify with characters. Not to say that readers didn't identify with characters in the past, but now they're seeing, going back before, multi-layers, multifaceted individuals that are real life individuals. And I think that is absolutely amazing. So now let's talk about a little bit on the feedback and the reception on realism. So how did you assess whether the inspiration for your characters resonated with your readers? And naturally, do you seek out feedback? And if so, from whom?
So there's a couple different ways I kind of like seek out feedback, and also have like make sure the emotional resonance is kind of there. So first of all, the first person I have it go through is myself. If I can't feel it, no, it's not working. I honestly, I wouldn't say I feel everything viscerally through my characters. That's not it at all. But I'm like, okay, I feel for them. I feel why they're going into this situation, certain things, or I feel something similarly and I could take from a past experience type thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. And with the feedback portion, I definitely have friends read it, family read it, that type of thing, and make sure like, oh, okay, like, is this getting through? And I don't ask that question, but I'm like, okay, let's just see how this pans out.
Right.
Let's see. Let's see how it goes. And 9 times out of 10, every single person who has read my books, either before publishing or after publishing, has said like, oh my gosh, like I can feel the emotions. The emotions are really overwhelming and it's really good. And oh my goodness, like this is crazy. So I'm like, I'm glad I did that right. Took a while, but I'm glad I did that right. And I'm glad it kind of comes to the page. So I definitely get that type of feedback from friends and family and that type of thing. Absolutely. So
well said, Olivia. And I think you may have touched on this previously, but I want you to go a little bit more in depth for this question. And it's on the form of transformative techniques. Now, when you were writing the book, as well as developing the characters, what techniques did you apply to transform real life experiences, either your own or people that you knew, into engaging fictional narratives?
So there's many, I would say, like that kind of, there's many things, many techniques, I would say, that I used during this. And that is definitely like the biggest one I think I've used is taking my past experiences and kind of translating them onto the page, because I write to de-stress and also to unload a little bit. So I'm like, okay, like I've had like this experience or that experience, and I need a way to release it because like I'm going crazy. I'm anxious. I'm overthinking this, like that type of thing. And most of the time, I'm able to write it down on page in a way that isn't exactly that, but it has notes of the thing I was previously struggling with. I hope this makes sense, but it's like I take a past experience or a current experience and I'm like, okay, what emotion am I feeling in this kind of scenario? I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this, and I'm feeling this because of this thing that happened, and I'm like, okay, so something maybe similar emotionally may be happening to the characters. Like they may be having like an anxiety type of thing going on. They may be overthinking something. And I try to think about how I feel in that sort of situation, or how my kind of like body reacts almost. I'm like, okay, that's where the characters are feeling it. This is where they kind of get that from. And I try and translate it onto the page in that way. I hope I'm making sense. It's very hard for me to explain, but it's the best way I can think of, to be honest.
Absolutely, Olivia. And you absolutely made perfect sense. Absolutely.
Amazing.
Now, this kind of goes back to something we just talked about, which is, that connection with, as authors, we want to make sure we have that connection with the story initially or with the characters, because you're absolutely right. If we don't feel that connection, no one else is going to feel it otherwise. So how essential is it for readers to relate to, characters and stories? And does deriving inspiration from real life strengthen that connection? Because again, going back to before, we don't want our characters to be caricatures. We want them to have multifaceted personalities.
Absolutely. I think readers relating to characters is one of the most important parts of writing. There are many reasons why I think this, because yes, you can have a world. Yes, you can have like all this amazing world building. You can have all this amazing, intrigue in the plot. But if your readers do not connect at all to your characters in any sort of way, or see themselves in them in any sort of way, then what is the story? Your characters are the thing that drives the story. It's the thing that drives your plot forward. It's the thing that even that gives you eyes to the world around them. And I think characters are the most important part of the story because of this, because they are giving your readers context. They're giving their readers their struggles. And I think if readers do not relate to that in some sort of way, then that is, number one, a problem, because then you really got to fix that. And number two, then they're not going to be able to experience the story as fully as if they connected to a character. And what was your second question? I'm sorry.
Of course, of course. So the second part of that question was, essential for readers to connect with characters, and does deriving inspiration from real life strengthen that connection?
I would say absolutely, because your readers, from what I've seen, your readers are going to tell if those experiences feel real. They're going to tell if it feels out of whack or fake or anything like that. They'll be able to tell, and they will not relate to it. So I feel like when you take past experience, or when you take a past experience from someone else and put it into words like that, your readers will be able to tell 100%. And they'll be able to be like, oh, this is what the author is trying to say. I can feel this, and I know this for a fact. And it's not going to feel fake. It's not going to feel like, oh, fantasy type thing, even if it is a fantasy novel, Like if a character's having a mental breakdown, we're not going to be like, oh, yeah, they were magically better 5 seconds later, So I feel like that is the most important part of that, is readers relating. And also your past experiences, I think, really do influence that and make it in that sort of way.
Absolutely. And also to add to that, another book series that I would wholeheartedly recommend to anyone wanting to see really good character development, character themes, and also, as we talked about earlier, mental health in storytelling, is a duology by Stephen Arion, another Wandering Scribe alumni who I had on the show, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and his duology was on The Warrior and the Coward. Now, I won't spoil it too much, viewers and listeners, but The Warrior and the Coward series follows a main character who he is kind of in the realm of that young lad who joins the traveling band of heroes, and he's the only one who survives, and songs are written about him. But what Stephen Arion did to the duology was something I had not seen at all. This is a character who wants nothing to do with those stories. He wants nothing to do with the legends because, in his own words, it's all BS. No one knows what happened, the truth specifically. All these heroes, these great warriors, they died in the most unheroic ways possible. Some died by complete accidents. Some were killed by just vagabonds and vagrants. And he, as a young kid who went, survived just out of sheer luck. Yeah. And he is suffering from PTSD. This is a child who is now grown into a man who's suffering from PTSD, who doesn't want to get involved. And it was written so well because it turned the hero's journey up on his head. And ultimately, he is what we would call a reluctant hero.
Yeah.
And when he does go on the quest, a young kid now wants to join him, saying, oh, you're this hero, you're all this. It's like, kid, go, don't follow me. And he's trying to tell him that this is not for glory. There's no songs, there's nothing. And again, I don't want to spoil too much, but the young kid, his naivety is awaken and you realize is that, oh shoot, what have I done? Such a great duology, such a great series, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. That is Stephen Arian's The Coward and the Warrior series. It's such a great book.
Oh, it
And
sounds amazing. Sounds like
it,
something I'd like to read for sure.
oh, you will absolutely love it, Olivia. You would absolutely love it because it also touched on something which I think a lot of authors do struggle with when it comes to writing characters, especially writing characters based upon real people or people in our own lives. And those are, the limitations of how much can we, going back to what you said before, that fine line between realism and creativity. So for you, Olivia, when you were writing the experiment series, what challenges did you encounter when creating characters based on real individuals, and how did you navigate those obstacles?
So I think the first part was making them too much like the person. Because when I first started writing, again, I was how old was I? I was like in 8th grade. I was in late middle school. And I didn't really know much about writing yet. I had only started writing prior, a couple years before, to be honest. And I was like, okay, yeah, I want to go write this full series, And I based I based 2 specific characters on me and someone I was in a prior relationship with. So that was a struggle because once that relationship ended, I was like, oh, great. Now I have these 2 characters. But what I ended up doing was like changing the personality, which is kind of how I got through that, was changing the personalities of both of them completely. They're completely different from their source material now. And I think that's like the thing with struggling with that is making them too much like the person or basing them on people that, aren't in your life anymore. And it's like, oh, this is weird. This feels weird. This does not feel right. So I think the main thing with that is, just don't base it too much on the person. Again, like give them separate stories to work through and separate arcs rather than like, being this person as a whole, I guess. And also, I guess, keep it true to the story because like you can't have, someone else being this amazing person when it's like, oh, this is like this really dark story and you need to have flaws in some sort of, I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm kind of rambling on, but yeah.
Absolutely. And this also kind of reminded me of a conversation I was having with another good friend of mine, fellow Wandering Scribe alumni, Deanne Dietz. Shout out to her. She is an amazing author and a badass nurse.
Oh,
and we were in an episode, I believe it was either her series with her friend or she was on my show. And we were talking about, the inspiration behind her series, The Afton Adders, which is her take on the Peaky Blinders. But what I found really interesting is as we were talking, she talked about her own experiences, which for her privacy, I won't go into too much detail, but for lack of better terms, they were not the best experiences. She was in a very, very dark place at the time. And we were talking about almost similar things about, experiences in real life inspirations. And she even said, for authors who write about either a particular moment or feeling for a book, there is a danger of how far down the rabbit hole do we want to go back to that memory, to that place that we were in our lives to bring about this story. And it is very, very true if you look at, us authors, because as we talked about so far, we talked about, real life inspirations and real life experiences. But when we talk about also experiences just a little bit, we also have to realize not all experiences are good when it comes to creating stories. Sometimes it's either a very bleak memory, a very traumatic memory that sparks a creative moment, a creative outlet. And the risk we run is how far, again, down the rabbit hole do we want to go down to, either feel that again and just having, your partner or someone that you trust to pull you from the brink. And I remember that. And it was like a very, very powerful thing because it definitely does make us think like how many of us authors have written stories that at the time, were from a very different headspace to when it
Yes.
was now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I've definitely had that experience as well with like early drafts to now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was in such a different place in my life or like headspace that was like, oh my gosh, like this is completely different than how I think now, And I've definitely had those experiences. So I completely get where that's coming from.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now they talk about, the evolution of characters, because I think it's also very interesting too, where we start off with one inspiration for said character, but the character may change, as we reapproach the story or re-examine the story with a fresh perspective. So let's focus on your characters a bit in the experiment series. So how did you ensure that your characters evolve beyond their real life counterparts? And what steps did you take in their development? And as a bonus, can you give us an example of one?
Yes, of course. So I'm kind of just going to try and do this kind of hand in hand with the example and the other thing. So there's this one character in my series. His name is Nathan. He's really cool, really chill. Love him. And he was originally based off of a very close person in my life. And our relationship ended. I don't talk to this person anymore. So it was kind of a dilemma because I had Nathan. I had this character. And I was like, oh no. Great. I have this now. What am I going to do with it? So I think the thing with that is that I think I based him too much on that person, so he wasn't able to become his own character. And what I did after that is, number one, I took inspiration from someone else. It's probably a bad idea, but I took slight inspiration from someone else. And it was actually my younger brother. I was like, oh, okay, he's really extroverted. He's like this. He's more likely to do this. So I'm going to try and put those traits very opposite to how he was before into this character and see how it kind of cancels out. And it canceled out very well. And I also changed up his entire backstory, which was another thing. And I just gave him very different things than the person he was previously based on. Like, he still has notes of it, I think, personally. Like, for example, like, he still has notes of this person, but I feel like he's a lot more different now just because I'm like, oh, okay, like I've changed his personality traits, I've changed how he acts in situations, and I've changed his backstory and stuff like that. And I think I'm answering the question. I hope.
Yes.
But yeah, so basically with that, I think it's like, okay, it's just the thing I would say to do is, again, don't rely just on that framework. There's other things you can use. Like I like to say there's inspiration in everything. So like you can like look at anything and be like, oh, okay, like I want this person to have that quality. And you can change it. You're the writer. You can do whatever you want. And that's the beauty of this, I think, profession is like, oh, you can do whatever the heck you want on the page. So I definitely think the main thing is like, don't base them too closely on the person, first of all. And also just add things that are different than your source material. And that was a long-winded explanation, but hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this next question, I think, is also very important because it's also focusing on cultural awareness when it comes to characters. Now, how did you also make sure that your characters represent a diverse array of real-life experiences and backgrounds? So I think that is also very important. And it actually goes back into research. We don't want characters to, be very much the same. We want them to be very, very different. But we also don't want them to be, caricatures of experiences. We also want to write characters as accurate as possible for the world that they're existing in. And again, that's that fine, delicate balance of, okay, I'm going to be basing this character off of this culture's experiences, how they are brought up in that family household. And I want to be, that balancing act of respectability, but again, a little bit of creative freedom and leeway.
That makes 100%. That makes so much sense. I think the main way I do this or like show these like cultural or societal differences is through mental health awareness. Again, Like, I think it all goes back to that, because I think one of the main ways I show diverse is, first of all, through their personality and how they act, because all my characters have an array of different ways that they act in a situation based on their upbringing, based on their past, some more traumatic than others, and things like that. And I also think through their mental health and the way that they think a little bit differently than the other people around them, and how they all have their own little type of flair. And, you know, and of course that isn't to blame for their actions or the way that they may act, but it's, you know, something to their character that shows awareness and to those different experiences and things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, this next question, I'm actually going to change it a little bit, up a little bit. So, as you talked about, Olivia, that a lot of the characters in your books, in your stories, are based upon people in your inner circle, friends, family, and whatnot. So, I'm actually going to ask this. Were there any real life figures that maybe you researched just to help with character development that may have inspired a character that maybe didn't make the cut to be added to the books? And if so, what qualities did you find especially compelling in them? Again, they may have inspired a character, but that character, unfortunately, did not make the cut to be in the story.
I have to think a little bit on this one, because I honestly can't think of an experience like this. I can't think of one, to be honest with you, off the top of my head, because most of the time I will base them, again, on personal experiences, on things like that. Now, if I was writing more historical fiction or something like that, that would definitely be like, oh yes, like I've done that. But I honestly have not really done that in my current writing. Now, could I do this in the future? Absolutely. I think I will, honestly. But also at the same time, I can't really think of a time where I've done like in-depth research on a certain person or character and had those traits kind of translate to one that I currently have or cut, if that makes sense.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Absolutely. Now, we're almost near the end. We got two final questions, which I'm very, very excited. Now, let's talk about the impact of fiction. In what ways do you believe fiction can shape perceptions of real life individuals and their narratives? Because I think that is also another discussion in and of itself, which is there are individuals, real life individuals, that may be given a little bit of fictitious backgrounds or backstories here and there, or maybe added to fictitious stories to have those interactions with the main characters. We can look at historical fiction dramas, for example. I mean, those individuals are based off of real life people, but they're not going to be, 100% accurate. Or the other side, we look at History Channel's Vikings, where it used real life people, but their backstories were entirely different. But from that perception, a lot of people will believe, oh, this is who they were. Oh, this is how they died. When in truth, that could run the risk of damaging that person's backstory, or completely convolute the real life history of that person.
Yes. So I think fiction is important for many reasons. And I think the main reasons for this, especially for real life people, like if you're putting a real life person in a situation, as we were talking before, there is a clear line. Like, first of all, don't base the entire character off that person. Don't do that. And second of all, I feel like at some point, this has always been like that for me. I don't know if it's like this for other writers, but at some point they should become their own characters separate from the source material. In my personal type of experience, I don't know if it's like this for all authors, but it has always been like this for me. But I think the thing is with fiction is that we need to make sure, again, there's a line, and also that we are dealing with these different perspectives and these different types of ways that we show the character in a respectful way. And in a way where it's like, oh, okay, like I can relate to this in some way. Or, oh, I can see how this may work in this situation with this character. And we need to make sure it's kind of streamlined. Like it makes sense for the character to do what they do, rather than just going completely out of whack, out of character, and like, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing? This isn't right. This is really dumb, actually. This is way out of character. So I think the thing is with fiction is that keep it consistent, and also, again, don't base an entire character on a person. And if you do, it should remove from the source material in some way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Very well said, Olivia. Very well said. And now we arrive at the final question of this incredible Writers Hub discussion. And I think you talked about it in the very beginning. And that is, of course, the emotional truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your writing, how do you capture the emotional essence of real life experiences when developing characters? And I'm going to go forward and said, is there a particular scene in either book that is based upon a real event or experience? And you can give as much or as very little as you like.
Yes. So there are definitely things that I have personally put onto the page that I have personally been through. Actually, I wouldn't say a lot of it, but I would say there are definitely some bits and pieces for sure. I'm trying to think of, so there is this one, trying to think of a couple of examples of this. And the main one I can think of off the top of my head is of one of my main characters in the first book. I'm trying to think because there's so many examples now. I have 5 or 6 examples. I'm like, which one am I choosing? There's so many. But one I could definitely think of is a character just who's kind of anxious. Her name is Clover. She's pretty anxious, and there are a couple of scenes where you notice that she's really anxious, but she's trying to keep it all together. And I've definitely had those scenarios where I'm like, oh my gosh, my life's falling apart. And then I realize, wait, no, it's not. Everything's fine. I think definitely Clover and also another character, Trinity, really show that. And I'm trying to think of a specific scene where that kind of occurs. Oh, here's one. So for example, in my second book, Masquerade, one of my main characters, Trinity, she finds out that her sister, that she thought was long gone dead, and also was a horrible person, quite frankly. Really bad person. Her sister was a really bad person. She did not like her sister for myriad of reasons. But she finds out that her sister is alive, and she freaks out. She has a freaking mental breakdown almost, because she's like, oh my gosh, my sister's alive, and she's angry about it because she's like, I don't want this. I don't need this in my life. And I've had definitely experiences like that where I've blown up like that and been like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. Get me out of this situation, pretty please. So I definitely based Trinity's reaction off other reactions I have had in the past with other people like, oh my gosh, why? Just why, So I definitely used my personal experiences in that type of scenario.
Absolutely, Olivia. Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this incredible discussion here on the Writers Hub, at the end of the day, what do you want people to take away from our discussion here?
I would really like people to take away that, number one, emotional resonance is important for characters. And also relating to characters is also such an important part of writing and character creating in general. And I think that that's just very important. And that is something that all writers should really take into account when they are writing or beta reading or editing their stories in any sort of capacity. And I also think, again, with basing characters on real people, that they should move away from their source material in some sort of sense. It shouldn't just be, again, a caricature of a real life person or a real life event. It should be their own person and their own story to tell.
Very good, Olivia. Very, very good. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude another amazing episode of the Writers Hub here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Olivia for coming back on the show in her official solo episode. Olivia, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as buy a copy or two of your books? And do you have any upcoming episodes on your YouTube channel that you'd like to promote?
Of course. So again, thank you so much for having me on The Wandering Scribe. It is so amazing. And you can find me in 2 places on social media. You can find me on YouTube on the Experiment Series official channel. And you can find me on Instagram also under the same name, Experiment Series Official. And in both of those bios, I have links to both my books, Exposed and Masquerade. And my 3rd book, Corrupted, will be coming out. And it's the 3rd book in that series. I should have mentioned that. But it will be coming out in August 18th. So save the date if you're interested. And on my YouTube currently, the 6th episode of my podcast I do with one of my fellow author friends is coming to YouTube sometime this week. I still need to upload it, but it is coming, and me and my author friend will be talking about plot and different things from our series. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in writing and reading podcasts as well.
Nice. I will link all that down below in the description of this video, ladies and gentlemen. I will also be tagging Olivia's first appearance on the Wandering Scribe in the Authors Roundtable up here. And speaking of the Roundtable, be on the lookout for the second episode of the Roundtable, which will be dropping on the same day this coming Friday, which I am so excited. Be on the lookout for that. That's going to be an amazing episode. And if you'd like to see Olivia back on the show in an author's interview to talk more about the experiment series and more, you know what you have to do. Like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and we'll see you all next time.